Ladies and gentlemen, we welcome you today to Rui Cunha Foundation and the opening lecture of our public lecture series, Macau's History and Heritage, which is co-organized by the Department of History and Heritage Studies of University of St. Joseph and Rui Cunha Foundation. And I would like to acknowledge this welcoming from Rui Cunha Foundation that agreed to host some of the lectures, which is also part of the Rui Cunha Foundation's anniversary, 11th anniversary. And I would like to thank our first speaker, Professor Francisco Viseu Pinheiro, who agreed to start and give this talk, which is titled Macau and East Asia Military Architecture, Context, Networks and Influence. I would like just briefly introduce Professor Francisco Viseu Pinheiro. He's an architect, associate professor at the University of St. Joseph, Macau. He's a licentiate in architecture by the University of Lisbon, Portugal, and he continued his postgraduate studies in Macau, China, and obtained a PhD at Tokyo Institute of Technology. He did studies in teaching cultural tourism, the Macau Institute of European Studies, and the IFTM. He also worked for many years as an architect on with different government institutions. Presently, he's associate professor, our colleague of the Department of Architecture and Design of the Faculty of Arts and Humanities at the University of St. Joseph in Macau, where he teaches courses related with architecture and sustainability and heritage. He's also a visiting professor at Jiannam University in mainland China. His studies and projects are related with urban rehabilitation of Macau's historical center in Macau Peninsula and islands. He has a wide range of research interests. He does research on history and heritage of Macau and its regional influence. His research is diverse, and it's from social impact of public housing in an aging society to synergies between green urbanism and heritage sites revitalization, healthy city and tourism-oriented development, as well as light rail train infrastructure planning and impact in the city, its scale and sustainability. Thank you again, Professor Pinheiro. The floor is yours. Thank you so much for agreeing to give this lecture.
Okay, thank you very much, Dennis. Okay, so this topic is quite wide, and I have a difficulty that I don't know where to begin because the full presentation is more than 100 slides, but I will start in the middle. That is more the Portuguese influence in Japan and China. But I brought all the slides because if some of you want to know about, for example, the Portuguese expansion, how many settlements were overseas in India, Africa. Also, I have something that I will not speak now, but the Chinese and Portuguese network mix, because the Chinese have a policy of maritime expansion during the Yuan dynasty, the Mongol, when China was occupied by the Mongols, the previous one, the Song dynasty, and also the Ming dynasty. However, the Ming, after Zheng He, they closed the seas to the trade. So any Chinese trading outside was considered a pirate, and we have a death penalty. Okay, and Zheng He killed around 500 of these people, Chinese, that were in the city of Perambang. That is somewhere here. It was a huge Chinese city, and the Chinese control the trade here during the Ming. So I also have some slides about Chinese castles, but if we have time, we can address, if some of you are interested in that, I can show later the mosaic of what we reach. So the Portuguese took a long step coming to Asia. So it started when Portugal reached agreement with Spain, that is our only neighbor. We are lucky, only have one neighbor. Sometimes we have good relations, sometimes bad, but the agreement was not to attack, so the Portuguese expansion was only have two possibilities considered in the 15th century, early 15th century. One is to attack the Muslims in the kingdom of southern Spain, in Granada, but that can have some conflict with the Spanish Christian kingdoms. And the other possibility was to step to the North Africa and continue to conquest cities from Muslims, and the idea was to conquer Jerusalem, the final end. We have to have in mind that I call Iberian because Iberian means Portugal in Spanish, are completely different DNA. I mean, in the military mind of the Portuguese and also the Spanish, than for example, the British, the Swedish, or the Russians, or the Italians even. The Spanish have 700 years of Muslim occupation. And it means 700 years of continuous fight. So when the child is born in the kingdom, you know, one day or another he will be attacked or have to fight for his city. And the same happened in Portugal. Portugal have almost 500 years of Muslim occupation. So some cities were conquered by the Christian Crusaders. For example, when one of the crusading forces going to the Holy Land helped conquer Lisbon to the first Portuguese king. So this mind of conquering and looking for allies was part of the Portuguese mind and expansion to Asia. Here we see only one map of Asia, but the Portuguese in the 14th century reach, you have Portuguese in Burma, Myanmar now. We have Portuguese bodyguards of the Thai king, and you have 120 Portuguese bodyguards. The Portuguese built a fortification of bricks in Ayutthaya, that was the capital of Thailand at that time, that resist for more than 200 years of the attacks of particularly the Burmese. You have Portuguese in Ethiopia, the 400 from Cristóvão da Gama, that stopped the invasion of. They don't stop completely. They slow down the Turkish invasion of Ethiopia, and Ethiopia now have many Christians because of the Portuguese that managed to defeat the Turks together with Ethiopian African troops. So there are a lot of actions. The Portuguese even tried to conquer the Philippines, Cebu, as disguised as pirates. They tried to dislodge the Spanish, to move the Spanish out. So there are a lot of actions that they are not known to the common public because there are many in archives, and most of these are in Portuguese. Malacca is a case that I can talk you if you are interested later. Malacca was conquered in 1511 and was conquered in the short period of time. It was by Albuquerque. Albuquerque is one of the most brilliant admirals in history, and you only have a window of time because of the wind monsoon. So he attacked Malacca, that was much more stronger city, many more soldiers, and he conquered the city with the use of a Chinese ship, a Chinese junk, because the Chinese junk have a flat bottom, so the Chinese junk could move to the bridge that separated the Muslim settlement to the foreigner settlement, and they bombard the city. So they conquer Malacca thanks to the Chinese. Okay, so the Chinese cooperation started already in at least 1511. But this is already in the 15th century. Okay, the Portuguese architecture also evolved from the concept of tower to the concept of the bastion, the triangle that we adopt from the Italians. If you want, I can show you some slides that appear in Chinese manuals. But let's start. If you are interested in military history, you can make any question about the involvement of the Portuguese in China and in Japan, but also in other parts of Asia. Okay, so, Macau, the Portuguese stay in Macau in 54, 53 was agreed to stay here. Macau is one of the unique places that have this kind of fortress that we see in the middle, that is St. Paul Fort. That is called a bastion. A bastion means you have a triangle shape, and this is called the Italian design. That was very successful because it can resist the cannon's ball. But before we have this, we have a tower there of 4 floors with guns. That tower is called a medieval tower. That was unfortunately demolished, and when they build a museum, they remove the foundations. I have a slide with that. We can go to that if you want to know about this. Okay, these are some Chinese and Japanese manuals. On the left is, you can see a squadron of arquebusiers of a Chinese manual. And this is a technique used, well, it comes from the arrows from the Romans, but basically there is a tempo. So some people are preparing the gun, the others are cleaning and putting powder, and the others firing. So there is a sequence. The idea is to keep a continuous volley of fire, so a wall of fire that was continuous. So this is a European technique that we see in the Chinese manuals. You also see this on the center called full NG. It says a Portuguese gun. There is some doubts if it come from the Portuguese or from the Turks, because the Turks also used earlier. But the idea of this gun that you see on the top corner is that is a breech loading gun. And what is the meaning? This means that the gun is charged on the back. And if you charge the gun on the back, you know how much time faster it can fire than the one charged by the mouth? It can fire 6 times more. So one of these guns can fire 6 times faster, 6 times more than a normal gun charged by the mouth. The charged by the mouth guns have another problem, that you have to go out of the ship to clean the gun. With this, you are inside the ship. So the Portuguese ships coming to Asia were loaded with guns, mostly brought from Germany, but then some made in Portugal. Some in Goa. Malacca later have a foundation, also a factory for these guns. And on the lower corner is a Japanese drawing. It shows a man with no clothes to be more clear the position, how to fire a gun and how to point. The Japanese, before the arrival of Portuguese in Tanegashima, the Portuguese arrived in the junk. One mistake people think is that the Portuguese come in the region. Most of the spread was in the Portuguese ships. That's not true. The Portuguese favor junks, Chinese junks, that were easy to maneuver. You need less crew, and you can find them everywhere and rent, and sometimes in partnerships. So the Japanese copy the Portuguese gun and make different size and different improvements, and this changed the history of Japan. Japan, before the wars, were done by the aristocracy, by elite, by the samurais. The samurais use normally the arrow and the spear and the sword. Particularly the sword is the most important. So when the gun appeared, suddenly the Japanese armies that were relatively small, you can have like 2,000, 5,000, you can multiply by 10, 50,000, 20,000, 30,000. So a peasant, someone working the field, can be trained as a soldier by using a gun. So that's why they produce manuals and produce guns in great quantity. Okay, so here are some of the Portuguese guns. Compare with the Chinese. The Chinese bigger gun is similar to what you call here the Falcão, that is with the ribbons. Was not very big, more or less less than 3 meters. But we have, for example, the Camelo or Espera that can be 3 to 4 meters long. And this last one gun can demolish a city wall. So if this make a big difference in the city. So before the appearance of the guns, you can have walls, high walls were enough. After the appearing of the more sophisticated guns, the simple walls can be destroyed in hours. Okay, so here are some guns that were made in Macau. This is so Manuel Bucaro was a gun maker. He sent guns to India, sent guns to China, and this gun is in the Tower of London that was captured by the British during the Opium War. And so you can see the gun was used 200 years after being made by the Chinese, so it was a very effective gun. So the guns before 1622, for example, before the Dutch attack of Macau, were not made in Macau. They were made in Manila, so in the Philippines, and they were supplied to Macau. So here are some of the guns in the military museum. The guns were also a reason why the Turks conquered Constantinople and conquered part of Europe, the use of large guns. This is again some manuals showing how to shoot in the ship, in the horse. And also, this is a Western gun in the Chinese manual. And here we can see this is a Japanese armor. The Japanese armor was lacquered wood and sometimes reinforced by parts of metal, but was not strong. This is a copy of a Portuguese armor that is metal and is bulletproof. So you can shoot at him and you will not die. Of course, this was used by the rich samurais or the daimyos. Okay, this is the Portuguese arrived during the Ming. Before they were not welcome because of what happened in Malacca in 1615. That's another story. But little by little, the Ming in 1621 captured a Portuguese ships and copied this gun that is the breech loading gun that we can see here. These are Ming troops defending Liaoyang, that later was captured by Nurashi. Nurashi was the leader of the Manchus, or better say the Jurchen. Jurchen was a tribe that also attacked North Korea. And they were mostly horsemen. They don't have artillery. So the Ming, for some time, managed to put them at bay by the use of guns. Okay, the Chinese cities were not prepared to resist guns. This is the Chang'an of the Tang Dynasty, but we have is a common, let's say, design of the Chinese cities. Sun Tzu is the military. I think everybody knows Sun Tzu wrote The Art of War in the 500 BC, and he say one of the worst tactics is to siege a city, is to attack a city, because it's very difficult. It would take 3 months to prepare the engines, 3 months to fill up the moat, and then you may lose 1/3 of the troops. So it was not a good idea to attack. But for my surprise, the Chinese cities are destroy many times. And I asked myself, why? And the reason is the fortification is mostly based on walls. These walls vary from 4 to 5 meter height. They were broad, so you can have soldiers. But if you have a large army attacking any point, you can enter inside. Then inside city, you see these rectangles. These are wards. These are walls, 4 meters high. And these are not defensive walls. These are administrative walls. So at night, people have to stay inside the ward, or you can be punished, or by arrow or kill. So for the walls inside are not defended, so it means the city, once you enter, it will be easy to attack. Then you have the strong point, that is the imperial city, and then the imperial palace of the king on the north. According with Chinese theory, the imperial palace should be in the middle of the city, and the city should have 3 gates in each side. But the Chinese city is also administrative city, so it's the government administration of the empire. And then the east and west market. This is very different from the western cities, that you have public buildings, because in Europe we have the Republic, the Roman Republic that you build. Republic means public things, like the baths, the basilicas. In China, you don't have that. You have the king, and only public space is the west market, that was more for foreigners, and the east market, that was more workshop of the things of the government. Okay, another city in China that survived, Pingyao City, is World Heritage. You can see the battlements, the walls, and the concept of the turtle. And very important in Chinese cities are the towers that are on the gates, and in some bell tower in the middle of the city. Another great concept of the Chinese defense is the Great Wall. The Great Wall is to stop the riders, the Mongol riders. And from time to time, you have the pass fortification. The pass fortification can be small, like this, with 50 to 200 troops, or can be large one with thousands of troops. The passes like Zhuangwan Pass, Shanghai-Wan, or Jiangwan, there are 9 big passes where you have big formations of are cities, basically, for soldiers. The problem is the Great Wall is so large that you can break it and overcome this defense. Another battle, showing here the cannons that also the Portuguese use, but the Chinese, this is an invention Chinese, is these firearms, and against the Manchus here. So the Ming battle with the Sung use arms. Okay, another battle in Kaiwing. Here we see some Africans and Portuguese from Macau that defeat the Manchus. The Manchus at the time acquire already some weapons. And I forgot to say, the leader of the Manchus attacking China at the Ming was killed by he was hit by the shrapnel of a Portuguese cannon brought to China. So he died 2 days later. Okay, so after that, the Manchus tried to get also guns, because they lost that battle because of the Portuguese guns near Beijing. In 1621 is the fight. Also, Li Shenzhen defeat Ming troops with using cannons. 1626, Iron cannons brought to Macau to Chinese. And 626 also he was killed. Okay. Later, in 1642, Adam Schall, that is a famous Jesuit, German Jesuit, he was the head of the astronomic bureau, is asked by the Chinese government to build guns, basically 40-pound shaker that is like a 3 meters long gun. He built several, and the government built 500 more. He did not want to build because he was a priest, but the Jesuits at that time, we have to see that the universities were founded by the church. So Oxford, Cambridge, Salamanca, Coimbra. So priests, particularly the Jesuits, were scholars. So they don't know just about the Bible. They know about geometry, astronomy, physics, medicine, and also they know about guns because this is part of the knowledge linked with geometry. So he helped the Ming Dynasty to build the guns. You can see here one shaka. Okay, now I jump to Japan. The rival of Macau exists in part because the Portuguese discovered Japan in around 5042 by accident. They discovered because there was a typhoon, and the typhoon brought the Portuguese to Tanegashima. And the Japanese get so much surprised to see the gun that he said that the head of that settlement offered the daughter to change for the gun. So it was so important. And so Macau was established as the base where the trade between China and Japan can be made. And so the Portuguese get the monopoly, like today we have the monopoly of the game in Macau. At that time, the Portuguese get the monopoly of the trade with Japan. And why? Because the Ming have a policy, and that called the Forbidden Seas, means Chinese cannot go overseas, and only the official ships that go once in a while to Japan or other parts. But the Portuguese can go. And here you see the big Portuguese carrack. It's called the Black Ship Corofune. And in these ships, it's quite interesting because you see not only the Portuguese, you see priests, but you see here hanging in the ropes a lot of Africans, and also people from Malaysia. And in this procession, you see the Portuguese brought from the ship horses, dogs, special birds. They even brought elephants, camels, and the Japanese. Here you can see some Japanese at the end. The Japanese were open to technology. They were completely different from the Qing dynasty that say, for example, to the British, the Macartney expedition in the 18th century say, we don't need anything from you, so don't come back again. You are not welcome. So, and this was many times the message. We don't need anything from anybody. So the Great Wall is precisely that, is to protect us and keep us alone. The Japanese copy many things. They copy the Chinese cities, they copy Chinese customs. And when the Portuguese come with a lot of technology, they open arms and try to copy everything. But they make a big mistake. They did not copy the ships. So when they invade Korea in 1592, they asked the help of two Portuguese ships. We will see these later. But the Japanese ships were quite fragile because they were used to be used only in the coast, not overseas, while the Koreans were. Okay, so this is the arrival of Southern barbarians. You can see here a church with the Japanese style. Japan at that time was in a constant civil war because the daimyos have their own kingdoms, and they have troops because of they have the new weapons. So they start fighting from dominance, and basically there are two groups: the ones of the south, the Kyushu, and the ones in the north, and later become the dominant one, the Edo, that were is Tokyo. And they planned the invasion to China through Korea, and they invade Korea, but they were defeated later by the Ming troops that use, for example, Portuguese guns, and the Japanese also use Portuguese guns. So it's okay. The missionaries, particularly the Jesuits, have the concept that if they convert the leaders of the country, all the country can become Christian. And they tried that in Beijing with Matteo Ricci. We know that. There is also this famous Spaniard, Diogo de Pantoja, that also is very famous because he was the one who managed that Matteo Ricci can be buried in Beijing and get the church. But he's a Spaniard, so he's not popular in Macau. But he is a very important man. So these are the three Japanese leaders that unify the country. And the first one is Oda Nobunaga. He was, you can say, a small potato daimyo warlord. But he used the Portuguese techniques and managed to defeat much bigger enemies. And also, we'll see later, he have an invention that the Japanese are very proud today. But that invention have a lot of Portuguese influence. Later came Toyotomi Hideyoshi, that was his subordinate, and succeeded him, and he was not friendly to the Christians. And then the Tokugawa Ieyasu became aware that the Christian daimyos, the samurais, could be a threat to the country because religion can be more important than the Bushido code that you have to obey the military leader. Until today, the Japanese mind is also in the DNA of the Japanese. So, for example, missionaries like Louis Freud that have a huge importance. He wrote the history of Japan. He talked a lot with these two, the Nobunaga Hideyoshi. Another Jesuit talked later with Ieyasu, but Ieyasu was, the translator was replaced by a British that was very much anti-Catholic, and William Adams, we'll see. Anyway. So the elite okay, so this is the Japanese society. So it's very strict. You have the emperor that is a figurehead, have no real power. The real power is the shogun. Shogun means the military commander. Then the daimyos, that are the warlords of the part of a kingdom, let's say. The samurais, the peasants, artisans, and merchants. A samurai can cut the head of anyone below just to try the sword. So. And here you can see the regions, prefectures of Japan. There were many, and all of them were fighting from supremacy. And here Nobunaga became the biggest leader, and later Ieyasu. Well, the Japanese copy one Spanish boat quite later in 1613. By Date Matsunue. This boat went to Acapulco, to Mexico, and later was have to be destroyed by order of the Japanese. Okay, Nagasaki. Macau trade was based in Nagasaki. Nagasaki was given to the Jesuits, not to the Portuguese, by the daimyo that convert, and he gave the peninsula, that's why Nagasaki means long cape. And we can see here, before here, this was the Jesuit house, the Misericordia, the San Francisco Church, and there was also a Chinatown for the ships coming from China. This is the Nagasaki in the city, that where the Portuguese live here in the big part of the year, and they marry with the Japanese, and you can see here some Western ships. And later, when the persecution becomes stronger, they build this island for the Portuguese, and the Portuguese were expelled, and the Dutch were allowed to stay, because the Dutch say to the shogun, "We're just looking for business, no religion, so you don't need to be scared that we may influence your country." Okay, so basically Louis Freud speak perfectly Japanese, well, many of them, and they don't speak only about religion, they speak for hours for many things. And I like this picture from a book. This is represent Louis Freud negotiating with a pirate. Part of the sea were controlled by the pirate, and we see the typical Japanese boats. This is Atakabune, that was the strongest boat. And some of these Japanese later convert to Christianity. And some of them were also used in the invasion of Japan. So the missionaries have an influence and could talk with a lot of people. Of course, they create a lot of enemies, particularly the Buddhists were opposed. And Nobunaga, the first leader, were very much anti the Buddhists. Well, the Buddhists in Japan are quite different from China. The Buddhists in Japan, they have the warrior monks, like the Shaolin monks, but these monks use weapons, and they conquered some province, so they were a threat to the power of some of the samurais. Okay, so this is just some events that happened. For example, Otomo forces. Otomo was samurai daimyo that converted to Christianity, and he received the help of 3 Portuguese ships attacking the Moji Castle and the Mori forces. The Mori is a big Japanese group, still very strong nowadays. Okay, and the daimyo of Omura obliged all the Christians, all the population to convert to Christianity. So probably there were around 200,000 Christians in Japan. So, and this number of people converting to Christianity is what may have scared some of the military leaders. San Francisco Xavier met Otomo Yoshihiji, known as Don Sorin, that appear many times in the history. And a spear came from Macau. A spear means a big gun, but the boat sank, so it did not reach. And he wanted to build a Christian city, okay, a city with the model. And now here there is an event that was very important. There was a rebellion of Murashige against Nobunaga. And the one defending the fort, so Nobunaga was sieging a Japanese fort. And the one defending the fort was Takayama Ukon, called Donjutsu, that was Christian. And Nobunaga said to Father Organtino, Italian Jesuit, that if you convince Takayama Ukon to surrender the fort without fight, if you don't do that, I kill the Christians, or I forbid the Christians. So Organtino talked to Takayama, and he surrendered the castle. And for many Japanese, this became a shock, that because like a priest can have more authority than a military commander. And also, there is mention in the Portuguese letters that the Jesuits wrote that Takabayama used a technique, a mining technique, to blow up some castle walls. Okay, so they were using military techniques. Also in Korea, they use the same. In the Battle of Okinatawa, Portuguese artillery helped the victory. Gaspar Coelho was the head of the Jesuits, met Hideyoshi in the Osaka castle. Osaka became the headquarters. And he asked the 2 Portuguese ships for the invasion of Korea. And Gaspar Coelho said yes, and also offered the help of some Portuguese troops. But this was completely against the policy of the Jesuits. The Valinianos say to Coelho, don't mix with politics because it could be dangerous. But Coelho wanted to help of Hideyoshi to fight the ones persecuting the Christians in the south. So, invasion of Korea, marching of Nagasaki, and then after the Battle of Sekigahara, the northern daimyos conquered the south, and the Tokugawa Ieyasu forbid Christianity. So Christianity became persecuted, and then in 1649 they were completely forbidden. Okay. So what are the fortifications before the Portuguese? So the fortifications are simple stone walls or mostly wood palisades. This is a Negodera, is a fortified monastery of monks. And you can see is low, some of them are in the hilltops, but low walls. And this is, for example, the Asakura Castle, a typical Japanese castle. So you can see a moat with water, and then the palace and the castle. So a little bit of stone, and mostly are compact earth and low walls. So basically, this is the evolution of the Tang Dynasty palace architecture. We can see here the siege of a castle by one of the famous samurais, Takeda. And the walls can be pierced by lances. So this is the walls made of bamboo and earth. And so very little use of stone. The Battle of Nagashino, where Nobunaga won using a new technique that is a palisade against the cavalry of Takeda that could not enter. And this is again a Portuguese technique that we see. You see here the Japanese and the Portuguese in the book of Lisuarte de Abreu. So when the Portuguese land, they have prepared wooden structures. Sometimes they call the wooden castles, prefabricated, and they put on the top. So in few hours, they can have a small wooden castle to defend for the night, or if they want to stay longer. Okay, then we have this thing. So we jump from this idea of the Japanese castle to this concept that is more a Portuguese concept of the tower, of the keep. And it's called Azushi Castle, because it's in Azushi Hill. And you can guess the one who creates the castle is Nobunaga. Okay, so the one who took with fort. It took 3 years. It was very rich, and later it was destroyed. But the Japanese start using the castle as the main military architecture. The Jesuits curiously have a tower. This is the Kyoto Seminary. And the local people complain because they can see the women that are in the lower houses. So the houses should be only one floor. So the use of towers were bring to Japan in the Portuguese. This is a biobo, with images of the city of Lisbon, Seville, Constantinople, and Rome. And all of these cities, you see big towers and the top, and the king transmitting the idea of the tower and power. So this is the example of Madrid that appear in this panel. The Japanese brought books, but also paintings. So the concept of towers was introduced in Japan by the Jesuits. And this is what the Portuguese used at the time of the expansion. This is the city of Évora. You can see here is a royal city, the castle of the king in the top, and the cathedrals. So the towers are a symbol of power. This is Azushi. You can see the tower, the castle on the north. And Nobunaga also create a town near the castle, and he asked the craftsmen and businessmen to live near the castle. So this is something new in Japan. He started urbanizing Japan, and this is called the castle towns. So it's something new, but is again connecting with the Portuguese and Spanish, Italian idea of the castle town. And these are some elements that you can see copy from the Portuguese military architecture. We have no time. So this is the first tower. It's called Tensu. Tensu sounds very much Tianju. Tianju is the name of that the Catholics give to God, means Lord of Heaven. And Nobunaga, on the top of the tower, built a temple to himself, and also a Buddhist sutra of the Buddha of the different times, meaning that, and the Confucian deities, so the castle became his house, but also the temple telling that he is the god of war and of Japan. Okay, so when the Jesuits saw this, they get very disappointed because they were thinking that Nobunaga will become a kind of Constantine that would convert the Roman Empire and become Christian. And when they saw that he built this temple to himself, they think, no, this guy mix Chinese Confucianism, Buddhism in this building. Okay. So this is the first castle. And this he also built with the Ming Tang concept, that is a Chinese concept of mandate of heaven. It means God give me the mandate of power. So the architecture and power is very much linked in Japan. This is a reconstruction of 3D. We don't, of course, it was burned down. There are many theories about the size, but basically, because we have the archaeological foundations, we know there was something like this tower. Okay, so we can see that the Japanese castles adopt several things like the tensu, the Portuguese is called Torre de Menagem, the keep where the warlord normally live. The Navabari means designed by rope, so the Japanese use the same. Matsugada is Barbican, is a kind of wall before you enter the castle to fire over the enemies. Ishitoshi is places to throw stones or to fight. Intricate composite doors. So there are too many things that are new for the Japanese, but they are practically Portuguese. And this research started when I visited a castle in Matsue in 2004 in a conference, and I entered a Japanese castle, and everything remind me the Portuguese castle that I visit a few years before, and say, well, this is like the Portuguese, you know, something. So it was too many coincidences, and that's what led me to study, to bring to this study. Okay, the castle towns. Osaka became the head of the capital of Japan. later, Tokyo was destroyed. Osaka was where Toyotomi Hideyoshi descendants stay, and Tokugawa seized and destroyed in 1614. So this is another castle that you can see is one of the best conserved in Japan, is the Imeji Castle. And again, the tower is the place for the king and also where you can have many soldiers. And then you have palace, barracks, and well, Tokugawa, when he reached power and became shogun, he forbid the construction of new castles to control the power of the samurais. And he obliged the samurais, particularly the ones in the south that were defeated, to come to be and live in Tokyo, spend money in Tokyo, and become somehow hostages in Tokyo. That only will change in the Meiji period, when the Americans obliged Japan to open the trade. And the samurais and the daimyos from the south took revenge and took the emperor as a flag to unify Japan against the shogun. So many Japanese castles were destroyed also in the Second World War. And for my surprise, these are the number of castles that have been rebuilt. Okay? And if you are in heritage conservation, you will say, well, they are building, this is not allowed in Europe, they consider fake. But for the Japanese, the Japanese castle is the most Japanese architecture they have. Don't tell them that it's a Portuguese influence, because I try to discuss with some Japanese and they say, this is a very hot topic, don't tell that. They get quite mad to tell that have foreign influence. And, but it's true. And also, they were planning to build the castle of Tokyo for the Olympics, but then came COVID and it was stopped. But this means that the castle are a very important part of Chinese architecture. Some of the castles follow old plans, others are conjectural castles. Well, in China also is happening the same. Probably we hear about the Datong. They destroy a big part of the city and move many citizens to build the walls, the Ming Dynasty walls, and you can see the typical Chinese city with the walls, the battlements, and the towers, and that we mentioned before. Okay, conclusion. China was influenced by Western cannon technology during the Ming and Qing armies. This was also present in the war in Korea. So the Koreans defeated the Japanese, not inland, mostly in sea. Well, inland also because the Japanese ran out of supplies or food. And they use basically many guns, some of them copy of the Portuguese. So the Portuguese, and particularly the Jesuits, brought influence of technologies like art, music, painting, but also war techniques that changed the configuration of this country. So Japan became a completely different country, so it became a unified country in the Edo period. The Ming, after the wars in Korea and several rebellions, became weak. And as they lost the Western support, they fall to the Manchus. Well, the arrival of the Portuguese influenced the construction of Japanese castles. And this technology was brought through many examples, like drawings, biobus, etc. Macau, as a Western fortified city in China, is a unique architecture, is World Heritage, and play a very important role, military role in Asia, in the history of China, as well Japan, Korea. Now both China as well Japan military architecture are considered important elements in their culture. So thank you. I have more things, but have no time to show about the Portuguese evolution of castles. But the Portuguese evolved from the tower to the flat castle that we see in Macau. The Montfort is a kind of this castle that managed to defeat the Dutch attack. Well, let's open now to questions, I think.
It's a wealth of different details and these complex entanglements between Macau, Japan, Portugal, many other nations. We have some time for a few questions.
Penny.
Well, thank you for your presentation. It's really interesting. It's new to me because every time I attend to your talk, you always talk about architecture, urban planning, and heritage. And for me, it's new, and it's a new angle to look at how military affect not just the architecture, not just the cultural identity, but about the city development. Look at I don't know. Macau is the place that I know better. We have a lot of military facility and equipment. It becomes a landmark, attractions to the city for the tourists. Would you like to comment something like to relate how military affect architecture and also the city identity, as well as our city development as a whole?
Yeah, okay, that's a very good question. There is a slide. Okay, I prepared this for even with about pirates, but we have no time to talk about that. But to show you Macau, okay, without the fortress, Macau will have disappeared in 1622. The reason is when the Dutch attacked Macau, they have around 1,200 men, also some Japanese, some Malabars, and they have the best. They were one of the best armies in Europe in terms of organization, navy, etc. And the Portuguese have around 150 Portuguese between local people. So 150 against more 1,000, almost 10 times more. And so the Chinese people in the city ran out of the city. The Portuguese were expecting an attack. So this is the tower I mentioned before that was demolished. The Portuguese expect an attack from the Nanvan Bay. Okay, this is a Dutch attack. And they land here where is now the reservoir, and we're planning to conquer the city where is now the McDonald's nearby here. Okay. And of course they have guns, and they get surprised when someone fired a gun from the Dai Sampao, from the Montfort. And the one who fired the gun was a Jesuit, so it was not a Portuguese soldier. And the Jesuit was so accurate that he hit a car with ammunition. So some Dutch create a big explosion, some of the Dutch die, and even some officers. So they get confused, but they still have the momentum and the capacity to conquer Macau. Because some Portuguese were here in the Bomparto, and there was a duel between these two Dutch ships. This map was Charles Boxer. He put the ships here, but I think this is wrong for two reasons. Is that there was fire several thousand bullets, cannonballs, and none of the cannonballs hit the church. It means the ships cannot be here, because if they fire here, they will hit the church. It means they must be here. Also because if they were here, they were to be attacked from the Montefort. So the ships were attacking the San Francisco fort that is disappeared already, but the main force attacked to here. So the Dutch get confused. They went Guia Hill. The Portuguese realized the attack was not here in the Praia Grande, so they rushed to the Guia Hill Hermitage. There was a small chapel there and the Hermitage. And with a few men and many African slaves, and this kind of slaves, they are not real slaves that we see later in the 19th century. This is called slaves of arms. They are bodyguards of the Portuguese, so they have weapons. And are these African slaves that make a kind of a kamikaze attack on the Dutch, and the Dutch panic and went back to the ship. Although there were many more than the Maconis and Africans, because of the panic, they try to reach the ships, and many of them die in the escaping. So Macau could be very much a Dutch colony, like they occupied Sri Lanka or Malacca a few years before and after. Also, someone laughing nearby was the British ships, because there was an alliance between the British and the Dutch, an alliance between the Portuguese and the Spanish. And the British and the Dutch say 50-50, means we conquer 50, we get 50% of what we conquer. But the Dutch, when they come to attack Macau, they receive information that Macau was poorly defended, because many Portuguese were in Guangdong trading, others were in China. The Dutch decide to attack without the help of the British. So the British say, okay, we will not participate in the attack, but they saw all the show. Later, in the 19th century, the British occupy San Francisco Fort and Guia Hill to defend Macau against the French. And there was a tension between the Portuguese and the British, and the Portuguese get the help of the Chinese to try to expel the British. So Hong Kong is nearby because of Macau. So if Macau did not exist, Hong Kong will be so near, because they need a base near Guangdong. So after this battle, the Dutch moved to Taiwan, so to Pescadores, and they stay in Taiwan for some time. And of course, the way the Dutch deal with the Chinese was completely different, was by force that later the British will also use in the 19th century. So when they see that the Chinese military was weak in terms of fortification, ammunition, technology, etc., so they conquered. But Macau was always faithful to the Chinese government. And also, I don't mention here because we have no time, but in the beginning of Macau, we have pirates that attack the city. In the early 19th century, the pirates attack Macau, and Macau organized a fleet and destroyed them. And then in 1910, against the pirates, attack and kidnap children that went to Coloane. So Coloane is part of Macau because of the pirates, or thanks to the pirates. So there are many stories. I did not focus in Macau because many of you know about Macau. But of course, Macau was the base, and it was the last colony to go back to the country, to China. So the military, as you see, the Jesuits were smart because without this is a military border gate, and the military Chinese were outside the border gate. And this is the military forts that you can see different shapes, even underground, that are in Guia Hill. So without military, Macau will not exist, no, because the church and other buildings were useless for defense.
Maybe to comment, what examples maybe of military architecture in Macau now require attention, preservation? We discussed with you many times, and this is your expertise as well. What do you think maybe requires urgent attention? I know, for instance, Forte de Santiago da Barra is a little bit in a bad shape. And it's part of Macau's identity, definitely. And it's something that has been, well, some of the parts have been well preserved, but some are not. So could you please maybe just comment?
Okay,
give
that's
a few comments.
a very good question, because the military will not well see, because the Portuguese try to separate from their military or colonial influence. But for example, the Gia Hill, you have tunnels, and there was place for the guns that could be replicated like in Sentosa, the Singaporeans did. Now is a park where people can see. There is a fort of Dona Maria that is empty, so they restore and no one goes there. I don't know if you know where is Dona Maria Fort. It's basically closed. It's a very small, it's a kind of a medieval age. Monja is also very dilapidated. These two forts, Dona Maria and Monja, was built facing, after the Amaral dead, facing invasion from China. But they are not considered, they are practically empty and decaying. So you see things are destroyed, no one takes care. St. James is the same problem. Bomparto, and for me, San Francisco, of course, was destroyed. But we have the barracks that should be, for me, the police should go out and they should become a museum or a tourist hotel, something, because it's part of Macau military history. And of course, Gia Hill is only half used. The other half is used by antenna of the Navy that is practically useless, but is blocked, so you cannot use the Gia Hill, only half of the lighthouse. So you can see that there is no real protection to the military heritage. Maybe because people know very few about them or they are far away. But if people know the history, they can, I think, could be attractions like the churches.
Thank
you. Follow up this question from the gentleman. Sorry, it's about Macau because I do research on Macau tourism. It seems that the military has huge influence to Macau. You say Dutch, right? And the pirate, right? But it seems that when we promote the heritage sites to our tourists, we don't really focus so much on the military side. We focus on the history or the person, the space. But what are the reasons they are not telling the full story, to our tourists about, I don't know, it sounds like a reporter asking you a difficult question, but yeah, do you think that this will be a niche or attraction for the MGTO to promote more the military side of our property?
Well, depend on the narrative. For example, if you compare the Museum of Macau and the Museum of Hong Kong, the Museum of Macau, the Portuguese, even the military, are well seen. You see the copy of the gun. But in Hong Kong, the British are the bad guys. So the story of the military is bad. The same in Shenzhen Museum. I saw there they are very much attacking the Portuguese military. So the military topic is not easy one, and for China also many of the Chinese heritage have been destroyed. So basically, all the city walls in Beijing and many cities have been destroyed. Only now they are recovering and consider, hey, this is part of our history. So in Japan is different. Japanese are very much military minded, but in China is not friendly to the military. In fact, many times the military were foreign bodies or even prisoners that were sent to the outer regions. So to be a military is much below than to be a Mandarin scholar in China. Also, the military can see a threat to the government. So there is a history reason why the military are so. But the fact is that Macau have very few soldiers always, hundreds. So, and you see in the Dutch attack, the priests have to be the one shooting the gun. No, but so how to tell the story about the military importance is not easy. Depend on the narrative that you want to say. For example, another topic that I'm interested are about the pirates. But this topic is a very hot topic because some people see the pirates as heroes that fight the foreigners. But in fact, they kill many Chinese in. So you see, you can see the pirates as good guys or bad guys, depend on the narrative or the agenda. But if you study, I try just to study the historic facts and see what happened. So in fact, the Portuguese were forbidden to build military fortress and guns. Only after the Dutch attack is when the Chinese authorities authorized Macau to build the forts. But the Portuguese built already some walls because of pirates and the danger of the Dutch. But for example, about tourism, the Montfort is already a museum. So this is a good adaptation of a military facility to tourism. And I think the Gia Hill deserve, we have tunnels and many places that can be landscape and adapt as a museum, also some museum part.
If we don't have any more questions, I would like to thank again our speaker, Professor Francisco Pinheiro. I would like to thank the team at Rui Cunha Foundation, Filipa Guadalupe, and all who have helped to launch this series. And we will invite you to more lectures that are coming in May. And thank you also for posing the questions. Thank you for coming to this event. Thank you so much.
I forgot to say something. Well, I'll give this RC magazine is one of the last ones that have many of these ideas. I give to the Rui Cunha Foundation. But many things I talk about here, the castles and the influence in China is in this article. So you can.